painting over flat paint walls can be a little bit tricky sometimes, but what if I told you that it doesn't have to be? Stick around and I'll show you a step-by-step method that works like magic. Now for this project, I'm only going to be painting the walls. So I'm going to show you how you can mask off your trim and how you can get some nice sharp lines when you're cutting in your ceilings. Now the first thing I'll do after covering my floor is I'll go ahead and take a broom and dust off the trim. Sometimes if you miss this step, you can put your tape down and it starts peeling off, which can be a little bit frustrating. Now to tape off the trim, personally I like using Blue Frog tape. I just like how sharp those lines come out. However, it does cost a little bit more than regular masking tape, so it's really up to you which one you use. Personally, like I said, I like the Blue Frog tape because it just comes out nice and crisp. Now I find the easiest way to put down tape is to pinch down the first section, pull about a foot or two of tape, and then use your fingernail to go along the edge. Now take your time while you're doing this. Keep tension on your tape and use your fingernail to get it right on the edge. And now that everything is taped, I'm going to go ahead and remove all the outlet covers, and then I'm going to take a Sharpie and write the color on the back of them just for future reference in case I have to do some touch-ups. One thing that's going to make it much easier to paint these flat walls is sanding them first. I'm using a radial sander with a 220 grit sandpaper, which is a fine grit, and I'm going to pass over this a few times so that I can get them nice and smooth. And hopefully that will prevent the walls from soaking up too much paint, because flat painted walls can be really thirsty and you end up using much more material than usual. And after sanding your walls, you always want to dust them off so that you don't end up with any debris in your finish. I'm going to be using a 3/8 inch roller. This is an 18-inch roller, so it's twice as big as the 9-inch. But the first thing you want to do is delint this, and I'll just use some tape to do that. But you definitely want to delint your roller every time, because if not, you're going to end up with a bunch of debris in your finish and it's going to be a complete eyesore. And see, this is exactly what I'm talking about right here. Next, I'm going to go ahead and wipe this down with a damp rag just in case I missed any loose stuff in here. Also, what this does, it helps the paint soak in much easier and much faster. Now, any other time I would only need a gallon to paint this room. However, since they're flat walls, I'm going to need more paint than usual, and I'm going to use 1.5 gallons. Now keep in mind that whenever you're using more than one can, you want to box them, which means you want to pour them all into one bucket. And boxing them is just going to make sure that you end up with a nice even consistency of your color throughout your entire room. Oh, and another thing you want to avoid is scraping paint from your lid, because as you can see, it doesn't mix well up here and you can end up with a different shade, so don't add this to your paint. Next, I'm going to dip my roller into the paint, but I'm not going to fully submerge it. You want to avoid getting paint on these areas right here, because that's what's going to cause drips. So I'm going to take my brush and clean this off real quick, and I'm going to let this sit for about 20 minutes so that the paint has time to soak in, and that's going to make it so much easier to put on the wall. And now it's time for the fun part. I'm using a 4-inch mini roller to cut around the outlets. Next, I'm going to cut in around all the edges with my mini roller and create a frame. Now framing it with the mini roller is going to make your cut in much easier. The wet paint is going to help your brush glide, and it's going to give you less resistance. Now the trick here is using a medium stiff bristle and taking your time. Also, you want to make sure that you pay attention to your bristles. You want to make sure that the outer bristles are gliding along the edge, and you want to make sure that you're working right in front of you. Don't overreach, because that's when you mess up. Now when you get to the corner, start about 1 inch away and slowly push your way up, and then pull away from the corner. Now take your time, but don't go too slow. Find the pace that works for you, but keep in mind that it's harder to paint a straight line when you're going slow. Also keep in mind that not everybody's going to learn this in the first day, so don't beat yourself up if you don't get it right the first time. Now after I'm done cutting in, I like to follow up with my mini roller just so I don't end up with any brush marks in my final finish. Now that I'm done cutting in, I'm ready to roll this wall. Since I started cutting in at the bottom, I'm going to go over this just to keep this edge wet. Now I'm going to move my paint tray closer to the wall just so I don't have to keep walking back and forth. I like to keep my paint tray right in front of me and close to where I'm working at all times. Now if you look close, I don't start all the way at the top. I start about a foot or two underneath and then I work my way up. Now the reason I do this is because when you put your roller on the wall, you dump a lot of paint onto the wall. Now if you start too close to the ceiling, you don't have enough room to spread out your paint. You're going to end up with a thick film on the top. That's why I like to start about a foot or two underneath. That's going to give me enough room to spread it out nice and even. Now I'm not using a lot of pressure. I'm letting the roller do all the work. I just put it on the wall and then I let it glide down on its own. And remember, since these are flat walls, we're going to have to dip the roller more often than usual. Now the roller is going to let you know when it's time to add more paint. It's going to sound like some paper tearing and you're going to feel some resistance. So once you start feeling the roller get heavy, go ahead and dip it into the paint again. Now you can mix it up and go into any direction when you're covering your wall. However, your final stroke should always end up in the same direction. Here I'm doing top to bottom. You can go left to right, right to left. It doesn't matter as long as your final stroke ends up going into the same direction. Now always check your edges because paint likes to build up right here. So I'm just going to use my mini roller and get rid of this. And I'm not using pressure, I'm just letting it glide on its own. I'm going to let this dry for about 2 hours, then I'll come back and do the second coat. Now I'm going to add an accent wall to this. I'm going to show you what I do to get super sharp, crisp lines without having to worry that the paint is bleeding underneath my tape. Now for this to work, we're going to use delicate surface tape. And the reason we're using delicate surface tape is because we just painted these walls and we don't want to risk peeling the paint off when we come back later on and remove the tape. Now as you can see, I'm putting the tape on the previously painted color. Then I'm going to come back using that same color and go over the edge of the tape. Now what that's going to do, it's going to seal the edge. And once that's dry, it's going to stop the second color from bleeding underneath. Now as always, I'm going to pass over this with the mini roller just to get rid of all these brush marks. Now it's been about an hour, everything's dry, and I'm ready to add the second color. And just like I did with the previous walls before, I'm going to create a frame and then I'm going to come back and roll this out. Now I didn't get to record me pulling off the tape from the accent wall, but here's a shot of me pulling off the tape from the trim. And look at those nice, sharp, crisp lines. You can't tell me that's not satisfying to watch.